Blow out the candles, let the dark settle in. Put your headphones on and listen closely. This is the story of the Reed Man, and it's already too late to turn back. They noticed him first at one of Martin's evening performances, though no one could say how long he'd been there, standing slightly apart from the villagers, just far enough to seem like he wasn't really part of the moment. At first, everyone assumed he was a stranger passing through. The marsh villages always drew the occasional peddler or lost traveler, but when people began talking about him later, the descriptions didn't add up to a man who should be real. The man wore a black velvet coat, the kind you'd expect from another century. There was no mistaking it. That fabric stood out, even in the dim light of the village lamplights. It didn't shine like a costume or some performer's outfit. It just seemed out of place, too pristine for someone wandering the muddy roads to a forgotten village. His eyes were harder to describe. More than one villager would later say they were not any color at all, not blue, not gray, but silver like polished ash, not natural. And the way he stood, you could tell from how they spoke that it unsettled them. The villagers described his posture as too upright, too held, like he was more of a shadow than a person, leaning slightly in ways that fought against the breeze. He didn't smile, didn't speak, and didn't blink enough to make anyone feel at ease. A few people claimed he tilted his head slightly while listening to the music, like it was amusing him, like it was meant just for him. Then when the song ended, he melted back into the background. One moment you saw him, the next you weren't sure he'd even been there. Strangers were rare to begin with in a place like Kirnu. People noticed newcomers, and they noticed even more when those strangers didn't fit, didn't belong. By the third night, when Martins played again, the silver-eyed man reappeared. This time someone tried to get close, a fisherman named Jazeps, who had never shied away from an argument or good mystery. But before he'd made it within a few yards of the figure, he stopped. He later told his brother he wasn't sure why exactly. It was as if the air around the man turned thinner as he closer walked, like it didn't want him to come near. The villagers began speaking in hushed tones about this man. They didn't trust him, and they didn't want to trust him. He wasn't like them, not by appearance, not by action. The stories only grew more vivid with time. Some swore his outline shimmered faintly when the marsh fog rolled in, moving in and out of focus like he was part of the mist itself. Others claimed his movements were overly fluid, unnatural, like reeds bending in the wind. Bending but not breaking, one man said, though he couldn't quite explain what that meant. It felt wrong though. All of it felt wrong. Baba Ilga was the first to put it into words everyone secretly feared. That's no honest man. That's something sent to watch, to take. People scoffed at her in the daylight, called her conspiracies, wild ideas from an old mind. But at night, when the man returned, no one laughed anymore. 4 nights after he arrived, children pulled their blankets over their heads when the music started. Even the adults kept candles burning inside windows until dawn, though none could say exactly why they felt the need. Interestingly, there are historical records of wartime figures, phantoms and specters, call them what you will, that have been seen under the stress of conflict. Soldiers from various fronts reported shadowier figures that didn't look quite human, or beings that seemed halfway human, but with something just enough off in the proportions or movement to spark fear. This figure's silver eyes and reed-like sway match eerily with stories passed between troops in World War I trench clusters. Shadow men appearing at the edges of heavy fog banks, moving unnaturally fast or slow, watching the soldiers but never approaching. Were these cases shaped by stress and exhaustion, or something else entirely? No one could agree, but the villagers of Kirnu would certainly have their guesses. As the silver-eyed man showed up more frequently, something darker began to shift. The music coming from Martin's reed flute carried a new weight, one that wasn't just emotional anymore. People said it felt too heavy to hold, though the melodies themselves hadn't changed by much. Even if no words were attached to what the music was doing to the village, no one could deny that disappearances were becoming more frequent. It was the young who went first, at least by most accounts. Children like Zelma, drawn too close to the whispers of whatever the marsh truly held. But the silver-eyed man didn't speak of the vanishings, didn't act, didn't even hint at his purpose. He just watched with those silent, unblinking eyes. He followed the music wherever Martins went to play, a shadow tethered to the swelling crowd that grew more desperate by the week. It became impossible not to connect him to the disappearances in some way, though no one dared accuse him aloud. His presence spread like cold wind, unseen and unavoidable. And then Baba Ilga said it, without looking out the window. Without hesitation, she stated plainly, "That's an agent of the devils. There's no blood in his veins to shed, no flesh beneath the velvet coat." Her words raised arguments. What could anyone even do against an evil, not bound by human rules? These weren't battles you could win with bravery or steel. Despite the village's unease, the man's focus remained Martin's. Night after night the boy played and the man listened, inching closer as if the music was beckoning him, summoning him. The villagers started to notice something else too. Martins began playing differently, not the notes themselves, but the way he seemed pulled into the act, like the music coerced him more than the other way around. The flute seemed heavier in his hands. His reluctance, his fear boiled down to one obvious truth. The music wasn't just his anymore. It hadn't been, maybe, since that first note in the marsh. What no one could agree on was who or what controlled it. The answer seemed to flicker every time the silver-eyed man turned toward the sound. End of the chapter 2.